And for more on Indonesia's economy, let's head to Jakarta and bring in Ibrahim Kholilul, Rohman, head of Samudera Indonesia Research and Initiatives. Ibrahim, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Michael.
So, Ibrahim, let me first begin by asking you, we saw new COVID cases in Indonesia declining from their peak in the first 2 months of the year, but now the virus is once again making a comeback with that more devastating Delta variant. So what's your take on how effective Jakarta has been in tackling this latest outbreak?
Yeah, this is a very difficult situation right now in Indonesia and in Jakarta in particular, but we cannot also blame the whole problem into government, as actually traditionally we celebrate Ramadan feast and Eid during April and May, and government has introduced very strict mobility restriction during the period. But as we see, there were still about 1.7 million people has been traveled during the feast from one point to another point, which complicates the situation right now. So if you see here that number of cases has been increasing quite dramatically, it's pretty much 20,000 during the last couple of days. And then the number of deaths is also quite increasing, about 400 yesterday. So we are still witnessing probably the increase in the trend for the next couple of weeks. But apart from that, if we look into the structural problem, even before COVID, the capacity of hospital in the country is quite limited. If we see the data from WHO, then the capacity of hospital in Indonesia is just about 1.2 per thousand people, which is much lower than average in ASEAN. So the whole combination between compliance and people awareness about the pandemic is still quite a challenge for us, so that the problem becoming much more difficult to handle right now.
So still indeed an uphill battle for Indonesia to really tame the coronavirus. And speaking of challenges, Ibrahim, we know small businesses, the labor markets, youth, they've been hit hard. Millions have fallen into poverty from the health crisis. I mean, is enough support, you think, being directed to the most vulnerable in the country?
Yeah, as if we see the report by ILO, International Labour Organization, in 2019, there are about 800,000 small and medium enterprise in Indonesia, and out of that, actually, government has targeted about 12 million to get direct transfer or direct payment to help them during the pandemic. So if we see that our size of SMEs has been very big, yeah, it's about 7.9 million people working in the SME sector and contributing about 27% of GDP. But still, if we see the grassroots problem, the question will be: has the subsidy should the correct target? That will be quite challenging, as we have really big population of SMEs. But government has been doing a lot of good things. As we see right now in Indonesia, we have introduction of free charge of electricity during a couple of months of the pandemic, and as well, government also introduced about a direct transfer payment, about 2.4 million per SMEs, and it will be extended towards a couple of months ahead. But the question is it enough? I mean, enough will be something very, very difficult to justify, as it also depends on the length of the pandemic. So if we see that the pandemic has been going on and on, it will be contributing to the the more difficulties that SMEs are facing right now.
And let me extend on that point in just a moment, Ibrahim, but I want to ask you before that, are there certain experiences you think from China on taming the virus that you think potentially Indonesia can draw upon to tackle its own health crisis? So, for example, preventing people from falling back into poverty or more targeted lockdown measures. Is there anything Indonesia can draw from China on that front?
Yeah, like you have also mentioned before, that Indonesia is very special. I mean, despite of the whole situations, the share of consumption in the bundle of GDP, gross domestic product, has been a blessing in disguise. So even though things are happening, still consumption has been contributing to about 55 to 60% of GDP. So the policy here in Indonesia is quite similar to what introduced in China regarding taxation. For instance, in China, you will exempt the purchase tax for new energy vehicles, for instance. And here in Indonesia, we also implement the same thing, that we, for instance, lower the tax for vehicles. The target will be to increase the aggregate demand and increasing spending from the middle income populations, by which we are very strong actually. So that we want that those portion of population can help to maintain the performance of economy through spending to maintain the consumptions, especially on luxurious goods, for instance, or other goods which are in normal term, they will spend the money for tourism, which they cannot do anymore right now.
Okay. And finally, Ibrahim, I want to get back to this question of sort of, is it enough? Because judging from what you've already said, it seems like Jakarta has done what it can to really help combat this crisis. And we already saw a very strong fiscal response from the government to tackle this crisis. So where do we stand on the remaining fiscal firepower to combat COVID? And do you think strong doses of social assistance spending that we've seen so far, can that be sustained?
Sure. It is chicken and egg problem. I mean, of course, when we shift all attention and effort to combat the health sector, then it will result to the expanding amount of money spent for health. And just a couple of weeks ago, the Supreme Audit Agency, or we call it BPK, has warned the government that a potential decline in government ability as there is tendency of increasing debt to service ratio, which means that our fiscal capacity will be more restrained by inability to create money internally. But as we see now that the health sector is already absorbing about 169 trillion of government budget, it's already equal to 6% of national GDP, which is greater than 5% of government mandate. But is it necessary? Of course. I mean, the first thing first is we are maintaining the stability of the health sector. So at this time, actually, the question about sustainability will be a bit kind of out of context, as we have to justify the health sector to be secured. Indonesia has big countries, and if the condition in Jakarta has been quite deteriorating right now, then it will be equally situation. It will be equal situation in other cities as well. So if we see, for instance, by yesterday, 20th of June, only 6% of population has been finishing the second doses of vaccination. There are long of the goal the government would like to target. And if we see the report by OECD, the portion of population that will give a positive outcome for the economy will be around like 50%. So it's still long shot. And in that sense, I think government will think whatever possible ways so that the health sector will come first from other options right now in the fiscal posture.
All right. Well, we certainly hope for a speedy recovery for Indonesia and hopefully a speedier mass vaccination program. Many thanks for your thoughts on this. Ibrahim Kholilul, Rohman, head of Samudera Indonesia Research and Initiatives, joining us there from Jakarta.